now and then will fall out in the management of a family of a far less compass. It was aggravated to the most heinous degree, and set forth as most unexcusable and criminal. Number 6. But I must not forbear to mention such as having themselves enjoyed the benefit of the hospital have left the most visible marks of their ingratitude. Children of the profligate life have, by reason of most invented ill habits, shaken off all manners of rules and good discipline, and at last run away, and having thus made their escape, have spread abroad a world of lies and slanderous reports, to cast the better gross of their own extravagance and unaccountable proceedings. Or if they stayed, they have, however, spun out of their own brains abundancy of lies and calamities, and communicated them to their mothers or some other relations, who, believing them without any further inquiry, have thought it their duty to commiserate their hard usage, and to take him away, and so have spread abroad further and further the slanders maliciously contrived by their own children. From some students also we have received alike treatments, some being reduced to great want both of maintenance and education have been taken into the hospital, but irreligion and profaneness have got so deep footing in some of them that they baffled all attempts tending to the reformation of their manners. We thought it at last our duty to clear the hospital from the dangerous contagions of so delusive and evil. As soon as they were removed, they made it their business to cast abundancy of aspirations upon it up and down in the country, and so have misled many people into rage and bitter censures, thinking they had reason enough to believe these that had been admitted into the hospital, and were eyewitness of many things had been done there. Number 7. But I forbear to set down any more of such uncharitable censures as have been passed on these charitable undertakings. Those who pretended to be the most modest in censuring and to keep within bounds would not scruple to accuse us of a bold presumption in this affair, and to make good what they alleged would quote our Saviour's words, "Which of you intending to build a tower sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficiency to finish it?" Perhaps because they themselves were never accustomed to extend their trust in God beyond their purse or the ready provision laid up in their vaults or storehouses, they think it strange and unreasonable that others should make greater advances and arrive at a pitch of confidency in God to which they are altogether strangers, or because they never were used to commit themselves entirely to God's providence and to depend upon His assistancy, they account it a solution in conduct to rely rather on the living God than on uncertain mammon of unrighteousness, whether of themselves or others, as if it was not a much safer way to reckon upon the powerful, infallible assistancy of the great Maker of heaven and earth, than to trust in the unstable promises of the wealthy, or have confidence in one's own possessions. Besides this, they have not well considered what a vast difference there is between a building contrived for the gratifying our own ease and luxury, or expressing our grandeur, as Babylon was by the builders thereof, and one erected merely for the use and service of the poor and distressed people, without any selfish regard to our own ease or satisfaction, the main scope whereof is the glory of God. He that engages in the former has reason enough to consult his purse, but whoever engages in the latter may reasonably look for a better and higher support, even no less than the Lord himself, who must strengthen his faith and carry him through the powers of darkness and the oppositions which Satan is apt to raise against it. Section 8. Objections against the building. But neither has the building itself escaped the forward censures of ill-meaning people, it being sometimes censored on account of its bigness, and sometimes on account of its magnificence. Unto such I have answered in short. I must needs know of when bigness and value the house ought to be, which is necessary to complete my design. But in the meantime I assure you that when the Lord hath finished this house, he will be as able and rich to provide for the poor that are to lodge therein as he was before. And sure common reason shows us that a house which some hundreds of people are to dwell in must needs be made of a larger compass than a private house. Number 9. Others have concerned themselves more than they needed in expressing their apprehensions, lest my relations after my death might attempt to appropriate to themselves such goods as have been brought out for the poor, whereas they might have made more rational concluded that I should not fail to preserve these by the means of a plain testament from that terrible curse which they would thence draw on themselves by so heinous an act of sacrilege, and thereby to regard them so as they may not fall under the least censure of unjustly inappropriating the goods of others. And though at the present, with approbation of the benefactors, I buy now and then several necessities under my name, which nevertheless do truly belong to the poor, and which I suppose may have occasioned the aforesaid aspiration, yet there is no want either of public or private records of such goods as belong to the poor. And now after all I take the freedom to observe that such persons as have themselves bestowed none of their treasures towards the advancement of the hospital may and ought to leave these concerns to the promoters thereof, whom I suppose will not be wanting to take care to see their charity employed as it ought to be and according to their intention. Number 10. Others again, seeing the undertaking carried on to a pretty good degree, would endeavor to persuade themselves and others that I am now wearied of it and wish it had ever never been attempted, whereas I do not remember that ever such a thought came into my mind, but on the contrary, accepting therein with so many signal proofs of God's providence, I have found myself more and more still engaged to go on with my fellow laborers in the work so happily begun. Number 11. Others have judged, and that perhaps without any ill design, that the management of so many schools and foundations made for the poor, and the many cares and distractions derived from thence upon me, would hinder my progress in religion. But as to this I can verily assure them, without injuring the truth at all, that as on the one hand I never in all my former life obtained such insight into the ways of God as I have done by the help of these manifold trials through which his providence has carried me, so on the other I never met with better or more frequent opportunities and incitements of the habitual exercise of faith, charity, and patience, wherein beyond controversy true and apostolical religion doth consist, than in the circumstances wherein I have been on this occasion. For my part, I thought so much better to lend an helping hand to my fellow creatures in institution of the tender-hearted Samaritan than to pose my satisfied with an empty speculation like the priest and the Levite. And I thank God that I have learned how the poor generally stand affected, to which I was a stranger before. Number 12. Others have thought the management of so many schools would prove a hindrance to the pastoral care I was engaged in, whereas they should rather have concluded that so vast a number of fellow laborers, amounting to 50 or more, joining their endeavors in the work of the Reformation, must needs carry it high, than if I should preach myself to death, being left alone to manage so important a charge. Besides which, I have a curate who sustains no small part of the pastoral care, and has hitherto answered the character of the watchful minister. Number 13. Besides this, I have observed that many have been influenced to such a degree by the father of lies, and even to forge many malicious intentions on purpose to hinder our course. Sometimes they would make people believe what whole wagon loads or sofas at least of money were bestowed upon the hospital. At other times, on the contrary, they would say that all was sporn, which often have been true enough, adding to their own, that now nothing more came in, and our debt were so mightily increased that we were not able to discharge them, which in a little time must needs prove the final overthrow of the whole affair. Both these fictions have proved no less injurious than malice, restraining many well-disposed persons from contributing any further aid to the hospital, because they either suppose that by reason or so large a provision as was talked of, there is no want of any supply, or else that it would be absolutely in vain to bestow any benefaction upon the work which was ready every hour to come to nothing. Number 14. An instance thereof. Nay, the father of lies has been so imprudent in his instruments as to give out that many thousand crowns were alienated and perverted to my private interest, that the Pope himself, Papists, and all manners of sectarians sent us money. Such and the like stories have now and then been heard to drop even from the mouth of those of whom one would think they should have had more understanding than to believe such ridiculous tales themselves. In fine, I must say that both ill and well-disposed persons have been too rash in passing their censures upon the work, the former from their own malicious contrivancy, the latter for want of sufficient circumspection, giving too much credit to groundless reports, by which, though they have not been able to obstruct my proceeding of the work, yet they have indeed created some sorrow in me, and that more upon account of the latter than of the former. Number 15. The assistants in the hospital reflected upon. But such and the like contrivances, how spiteful forever, are not so paralleled with these that assault us near home, and which not only have fallen upon me, but likewise, as was hinted before, upon these which join their hearts and hands with me in this affair. These have been most maliciously charged that they did feather their own nest and alms bestowed on the hospital, whereas I must needs say to the contrary, that they have learned to make shift with very little, and being all day long employed in the business of the hospital, they have no time left to get their living any other way. And sometimes when in their want they have been relieved by other charitable persons, they have willingly parted with it to those who were in greater straits than themselves. Nay, some of them have sold their books and gauths of care, of case of extreme want, to make provision for the poor. Number 16. Their comfort. How often God has supported them in the midst of such trials as generally attend such an undertaking, and raised their sinking spirits above the reach of the outward difficulties they were to pass through, might be made plain of many instances, but to be short I shall produce but one. When the building of the hospital was just begun, the workmen employed to carry off the rubbish, the steward or he who was instructed with the chief management of the undertaking, met with abundance of difficulties. The laborers, one while wanting stones, another while sand or lime, tired him very much with their impudent demands. He not being in a condition then to afford a present supply, because there were neither horses of our own, nor the least appearance of getting any hired for that use, it being just in the height of harvest. This now very much discouraged him, and cast him into sorrow and perplexity, when, finding his thoughts overcast with deep care and concern, he got away into his closet to be for a while by himself alone, and in some measure to recollect the scattered powers of his mind. He was but just retired, and venting himself to God in sighs and groanings, when the master bricklayer followed him at his heeds, and called him back out of his privacy, telling him withal that stones and other necessities were immediately to be provided, otherwise the workmen would cease their work, and yet demand their full pay. This cast him down yet lower. However, away he went with the bricklayer, though he did not know how to break through these difficulties that surrounded him. When he came to the place where the men were at work, one of the laborers happened to find a piece of coin in the rubbish that he digged up. This he offered to the steward, who took it, and looking upon it, he found the following words impressed upon it, in Latin, translated into English: Jehovah, the builder, crown this building with a happy conclusion. The reading of the inscription raised his sinking faith to that degree that with great presence and readiness of mind he went to work again. Footnote from the reader. This coin was printed in 1650 to 1655. End of footnote. Hoping now that he should live to see the building brought to perfection, though at present, while they were but breaking up the foundation, we had to entertain with many difficulties. In the meantime, he contrived a way to get together such necessities as the bricklayers had minded him of, and within a few days it happened that 2 horses were made over to us, and some time after 2 more, and at last another to help forward the building. The metal was an old piece of coin of the Prince of Weimar, upon which a friend has made the following epigram: When Francke a seat would purchase for the poor, a wondrous coin was found to augment the store, in whose inscription heaven's high favors read, bid with large hopes the pious rear their head. God's penny to his poor is pledge of stores, and of God's hand to crown the work assures. Then bring your timely offerings in full measure. Who gives to God can only keep his treasures. Number 12. Persons of a worldly mind, being strangers to such circumstances as these, under which the affair was carried on both by me and my fellow laborers, have now and then sued for some preferment in the hospital. But when they came to be informed of the narrowness of our circumstances, and that our business was managed without any regard to private interests, nay, that even they who were engaged in it must learn to suffer poverty with the poor, they soon have let fall their design. In short, most people have entertained too earthly thoughts of the business, and have been too apt to believe it was settled on such a foundation as tended to the promotion of secular interests. But such and the like things as are managed under the mystery of the cross are better known by experience than by discourse. If any one endeavors in earnest to support his poor fellow creatures, lying in the wayside in a forlorn condition, both of soul and body, and out of sincere compassion, shall help to bear the burden, how soon will he perceive himself to lie under the burden heavy enough. End of chapter 3.